Hey, let's talk about games.
Hello my friend, it's Hydra here. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about Necromunda, the forthcoming game for 40k, set obviously in the world or underhive of Necromunda, and it's being made by the manufacturers, the developers of Mordheim. These guys are Rogue Factor. They're a lovely bunch. They're Canadian, so obviously they're going to be. They're incredibly polite. But as well as that, I'm very, very excited about their forthcoming game because I loved Mordheim. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about Mordheim itself. It was a turn-based strategic game, kind of true to the tabletop in some senses. It gave a really good vibe for some of us that liked the Warhammer Fantasy skirmish-type battles. Now, obviously, they're having a crack at Necromunda, bringing themselves into 40k. They're stepping into the Unreal Engine, but I want to talk about today what they need to learn from Mordheim. I want to gather your thoughts down in the comments below as to what you thought of that game, how it worked for you, did it do it for you, did it tick the right boxes, did it press all of your buttons? For me, there were a few issues with the game, although, let's be fair, I did love it. I put about 300 to 400 hours into it, made a few guides. Some of you might remember the old Skaven guides, but let's get talking about the actual issues with the game itself. Now, first up, it was a turn-based game. Now, this isn't necessarily a criticism, so much of a statement of fact that turn-based games are somewhat of a niche and somewhat harder to market to a mass sort of majority. There are plenty of turn-based games out there that are very good. They are enjoyable for some people, but if a game is heavily turn-based, it can be off-putting and somewhat harder to pitch. Now, the reason I'm commenting on this is because they have said, and they have demonstrated, privately rather, that the forthcoming game is going to be a mixture of real-time as well as a little bit of turn-based combat. So it's really interesting that they're going to go for this sort of mix-up this time. For me, I like to visualize something like Final Fantasy. You move around in real time, you go into a battle. If the combat is done well and nicely, I really think the game may already be, just from this one change, a little bit more accessible to people. So I'm really excited about that. That's not really a bit of feedback, that's just something I'm actually looking forward to. Now, one of the other things of the game that did sort of, and will always be a controversial thing, to Mordheim that is, was the RNG nature of it. I mean, the game, whenever you walk through a door, you stepped over a trap, you hit someone, you tried to crit someone, you got hit, you got injured, you climbed up a ladder, everything was RNG. And you know what happens when you have enough players playing a game that involves RNG? There will be people on the forums that are fed up with their bad luck. Partially, of course, the bias of human nature here is that you tend to remember the bad luck more than you remember the good luck. The sort of the rough ratio here is the bad luck is twice as bad as good luck. That's roughly how the human mind works. So RNG games tend to attract a lot of people that just don't like the RNG, because when it goes bad for them, they get super angry, and when it goes well for them, they're kind of like, yeah, that was kind of fine, yep, whatever. So that is a bit of an issue. Now, that being said, I mean, the RNG nature of it was really integral to the gameplay. I wouldn't like to see it go, but I would like to see Necromunda be maybe a little bit less RNG focused in terms of some of the mechanics, etc. Now, for the real sort of nuts and bolts of this conversation, I want to talk to you a little bit about their AI within Mordheim. Now, for me, this was one of the main limiting sort of factors with the game. And let's be fair here, when I say AI, I mean the decision trees of these characters. They're not artificial intelligences. They have a bunch of commands, a bunch of if-then equal situations, and from there, they will make decisions in the game. And the problem with it was that it was predictable once you've played the game enough, and it was, more importantly, abusable. It's sort of, if you imagine Mario, when an Oompa is moving from right to left, that's absolutely fine. You can use that to your advantage to predict where they're going to go, and you have a fun game just sort of running through them, cruising through. In a game like this, the AI being predictable just means that you can gain advantages off of it and, well, just abuse them to your liking, really, which for me was a little bit of an issue. There were large mobs getting stuck under doors. There were basically certain formations you could do, put your weakest unit at the back, and you knew that they would try and get to the weakest unit. They'd walk around the sides of all of your troops trying to avoid the hard ones to get to the easy one, and then you just jump on them and pounce. And there was a few things like that, and I do think their decision tree for the forthcoming game will definitely need a few tweaks and improvements. Now, the next point of criticism follows on from this. Now, obviously, if you're having trouble with AI, you think, well, why don't I play against a player? That would make sense. I mean, they're surely the ultimate AI, surely. And that would kind of make sense. But in Mordheim, the PvP itself, the player versus player experience, wasn't very well integrated into the game. There was a player versus player function, and it functioned okay if you could find a game and if you could set up a skirmish, etc. But it wasn't very intuitively sort of synced up. There were a couple of issues with it. One of which was that it's, well, by the game's nature, it's incredibly punishing when things go badly, and things will go worse against a player than an AI. So, the result was basically you didn't really want to play a PvP because your warband would all die. And it was really off-putting for me from actually sort of playing games like that. And then you had the issue as well that if you had a friend that had a warband and yours was a different level, you wanted to play each other, you'd end up just both making a fresh warband. It was not ideally set up, and granted, this is perhaps one of the more complicated features of a game like this to set up. There's lots and lots of different options though, let's be fair. Given the skirmish-type nature of Necromunda, you could probably have a game mode where you just have a certain amount of points, you make a warband using whatever you've got available, and then you just do matches around that. You could maybe have a campaign PvP exclusive mode where you have a PvP warband, and that can only play against other warbands. You could even have auto-balancing features involved too, if you're playing against a lower level, etc, etc, etc. Now, I'm not saying for a second that that would be easy to do. But for me, for the longevity of the game, that would be a very, very interesting variable to keep this interesting and keep the community, well, keep them going, basically. The good thing with Necromunda is they've got so much juice to go on. With all of these guys being re-released on the tabletop, they have a wealth of information at their fingertips here. The mission systems from the board game are more or less ideally set up to be copy-pasted into a sort of a gaming format. The board game stuff is like sort of find items on the map and bring them back, or go and activate a button, or defend this area. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff like that I really feel would lend itself well to the game, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how much of it they sort of take on board. But for me, one of the main things that held me back from staying with Mordheim longer than I did, and I did stay with it quite a long time, was the lack of convenience playing campaigns with other players. I mean, going onto Facebook to find a group so you can play a league and play at different times and sort of schedule games with each other was all well and good if you're after having a niche player base of about 500 people. If you want it to be successful, and this really could be, I do think they're going to need a system where players can come home, jump on for an hour or two, play a couple of games against some people, have a bit of fun, feel like they had a fairly fair experience, not feel like their warband got, or let's say gang in Necromunda obviously because it's not a warband anymore, but not feel like they just lost all of their progress because they had a rough game. Obviously it may need to remain punishing, these guys like, or maybe they're a little bit masochistic, but I'm looking forward to it. Some things that I am excited about, I mean genuinely excited about, the aesthetics look like stepping into the Unreal Engine was a good move for them. The game looks very pretty. Now granted, we've only seen a few screenshots, and some people lucky enough to go to Paris were able to see a little bit of in-game footage, I believe. But they've definitely made aesthetic improvements, and there are some exciting features coming. We know they're playing around with a lot at the moment. I've tried to get an interview from them, and I've had a little chat with the developers, which was basically all the information that they gave to Valrak anyway. It's basically that you can change colours of your gangs, that's pretty much a given. There's a few different multiplayer modes, but at the moment they're just playing with let's kill each other, which sounds pretty reasonable. Obviously the game has a lot of verticality. There are weapons that are cross-gang compatible, however when you equip a weapon, let's say on an Escher versus a Goliath, it will look differently and be customised according to your gang member. Other than that, you can expect a lot of the usual stuff that you would expect from Mordheim, so progression, skills, you know, attributes, etc., make your characters better, gear them up, etc., etc., currency. One other thing that I really would say would be an interesting concept is turf wars, gang wars, etc. Maybe. Now, I'm not saying this game should copy Eternal Crusade in any way. God, no. But there have been world map, gang, turf type organisations. Let's think Knights of Camelot, the really old one, Dark Knights of Camelot. I forget the name now. There's loads of games that have played around with these sorts of concepts. So you're actually playing battles and skirmishes for sort of larger global reasons. That could maybe be a very interesting something they could think about. I'm really looking forward to getting some extra info on this game. I want to know what you guys have to say about it. Of course I'm going to be doing guides. I loved Mordheim, did a few guides for that. Going to be covering this game in some juicy detail. Take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.